everybody and welcome back. Today I want to do a video talking about some recommendations for literary fiction. So I know that literary fiction for a lot of people can be a really intimidating genre to try to get into or to try to read. There can be a lot to navigate, from very stylized prose to heavy themes to very dense subject matter, and the style of writing is so varied from author to author that it can be difficult to know where to start or where your tastes might lie. As someone who grew up reading exclusively fantasy, once I started university, I found that I was really lost when it came to reading almost anything else. I had to read some Canadian fiction just in like English class in school and some of the classics that they make everybody read in the school system. But those books didn't appeal to me in the same way that fantasy had. And so I had thought for a long time that I didn't like to read those genres. I thought that they were pretentious, or that they were things that people made you read just because somebody told them to, that they didn't have the kind of value that teachers seem to think that they did. And while I do still have a lot of issues with the books that they choose to teach to young people, the books that they try to force upon people, I do think that there are tons of works of literary fiction that are super accessible and that are easy for anyone to read, no matter what genre you might like. So today I wanted to do a video similar to my one that kind of compared classic and modern fantasy, saying if you like this really popular work of fantasy, then perhaps you would also like this really popular work of literary fiction. So I tried to pick some of the fantasy books that get talked about a lot on Booktube, that seem to be popular, that a lot of people have read, and pair them with works of literary fiction that I have read and enjoyed and felt like epitomized some of the similar themes, or maybe used some of the same structures, or had a very similar type of prose. Starting out, I want to bring up the pairing of books that I think goes the best together of all of the items on this list. And that would be, if you like Stephen King's The Gunslinger, and I mean The Gunslinger as in the first book of the Dark Tower series, not necessarily the entire Dark Tower series, but that particular entry. And I think if you liked that book, then you would probably really like the book The Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt. So The Gunslinger, for anyone who doesn't know, is the initial volume in Stephen King's Dark Tower series, which is kind of a fantasy horror western meld. It's a 7-book series, and the first entry, The Gunslinger, definitely pulls the most from those kind of western influences. It feels very much like a western and only a western, and focuses on Roland as he walks across a desert in pursuit of someone named the Man in Black. And as Roland follows the Man in Black through this desert, he encounters a small town, and hijinks ensue from there, essentially. There are some elements of flashback in the narrative where we get to look at Roland as a young person, and potentially some of the factors that influenced him on his decision to undergo this quest or take on this task. By contrast, The Sisters Brothers is a work of Canadian fiction, so represent, by Patrick DeWitt, that follows two brothers named Eli and Charlie Sisters. And the Sisters Brothers, as the title suggests, are a pair of cowboys, essentially, who work for a man called the Commodore. And the Commodore has sent them on a quest to go and find a gold rush prospector and kill him. So the Commodore wants this man killed, and Eli and Charlie go off on an adventure to carry out that task. Eli is a little more introspective than Charlie, and he's starting to feel disillusioned with the type of life that they lead. He's feeling that maybe he wants to settle down, maybe there's more to life, but the problem is that he's really attached, and he really looks up to his brother Charlie, who is the significantly more violent of the two and who seems to really enjoy the type of work that they do. So what follows is a kind of an adventure western where we see Eli really struggle with these conflicting sides of his personality. It is really funny and really dark, and I think if you like that kind of Western atmosphere of the gunslinger, if you like those complicated, complex characters, because Roland is the hero of the Dark Tower, but he is not exactly what you would call a good guy, and Eli is definitely trying to make some changes in his life, but has done and continues to do some pretty awful things. So if you like those complex heroes, a Western narrative, if you like your stories to have a little bit of an element of the weird and the unpredictable, then I think that you would like either of these books. My next recommendation would be, if you like the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, then perhaps you would like to check out the post-apocalyptic novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So the First Law trilogy, for anybody who's left out there who doesn't know, is Joe Abercrombie's initial trilogy, his initial work of grimdark fantasy that follows a collection of characters who are, a number of whom kind of go off on a quest together. And these are very character-driven novels. It follows a man named Glokta, who was a war hero, who then became a prisoner of war that led to him becoming a torturer. We follow Jezal, who's kind of the beautiful golden boy who can do no wrong, has to work hard for nothing, whose friends look up to him, who enjoys having people fawn over him. And he is selected by one of the kind of secondary characters to go on this quest, and is about to learn that life is a lot tougher than he thinks. We have Logan Ninefingers, who is a man of the North and has clearly undergone some trauma, of which we're not really sure the entire nature, but is kind of a rugged, wild man from the woods. And we follow a couple of other secondary characters, Baez being one of them, who is the kind of the mentor character who brings Jezal and Logan together. And we watch them as their story slowly unfolds, and we get to see how their interactions influence the overall plot. It is a very grim story. There is a lot of violence, but that is not super explicit. And it's more thematically, you build up this sense of dread as you work your way through the novel, and you begin to realize that you shouldn't get attached not only to the characters, but you shouldn't get attached to the idea that there might be happiness for any of these characters. Things kind of go from bad to worse to completely horrible, and it is really enjoyable to watch Joe Abercrombie put his characters through that torture. The writing is very solid and the character work is exquisite. By contrast, The Road by Cormac McCarthy, like I said, is a post-apocalyptic novel, and it focuses on a man and his son as they trek through what is, I believe, post-apocalyptic America, and they encounter other survivors along the way. Unlike a lot of post-apocalyptic fare, it's not an adventure story. It is not this high octane, we're going to escape these bad people and we're going to come out the hero and we're going to find a cure. It's more what it would be like to try to guide the person that you love the most and that you want to protect above everything else in a world that has truly become horrifying. It's got kind of the framework of an epic adventure within this kind of close, frightening horror setup. It makes you feel like the end of the world is actually here, and it makes you wonder what you would do and how you would maintain hope. And is hope even a thing that is worthwhile in that setting? It is heartbreaking and it is fantastic. It had a lot of buzz when it came out, I think like in the mid 2000s. I feel like everybody who was a reader read that book at this time. But if it kind of passed you by at that time, or if you weren't interested in that genre, if you are a fan of the First Law trilogy, I think that The Road would be an excellent kind of introduction into literary fiction. Next, I would like to say that if you enjoyed the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, then I think a good selection to try might be Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. So the Farseer trilogy focuses around Fitz, who is a royal bastard brought up in a king's court where he is trying to navigate the politics to try to find his role within this royal family, where he can work for his kingdom and work for his king without being looked on or regarded as a threat by those other people who are in line for the throne. So it is very character focused. It follows Fitz from the time that he is a young boy and is very much a coming of age novel. It follows him as he grows in this really dangerous world that he is brought up in, and he begins to train as an assassin. And this is not the kind of like Nevernight or Throne of Glass. Like, it's not the kind of assassin where you're going to follow someone through assassin school and they're going to do really unrealistic and but still cool things to take out everyone in their path. Fitz is someone who learns to work in the shadows, and he is someone, again, that Robin Hobb enjoys putting through the ringer. The things that happen to Fitz are so sad, and as the trilogy goes on, you just start to wonder, like, how much can one person take? But Robin Hobb's prose is gorgeous. Her character work is excellent. You will fall in love with the secondary characters as well. And there's a big emphasis on mental health. And for some of those reasons, that's why I think that Norwegian Wood pairs really well with some of the themes that are explored within Assassin's Apprentice or within the Farseer trilogy. Norwegian Wood follows a university student named Toru Watanabe, and it follows him through university as he navigates his first romantic relationships and tries to discover who he is and what he wants to accomplish. So again, it is a coming of age novel. It's probably the tamest of Murakami's novels in terms of weird asides and weird character developments. It is a fairly standard coming of age novel, but it is gorgeously written. There are lines from this book that I still think about and that I could still quote, even though I read this, it must have been a decade ago. And it is, I think it pairs well with the Farseer trilogy because, like Fitz, Watanabe is an unreliable narrator. Like Fitz, he has to navigate a lot of complex relationships and complex emotions. It deals heavily with grief and loss and mental health struggles. Suicide is talked about openly in Norwegian Wood, and both authors have a way of making you invested in their characters, and both of them are just really talented writers, in my opinion. Both Murakami and Hobb, though they're operating in different mediums and they write in different ways, I think that they both just have an excellent command of language. I will call Murakami's writing a little more lyrical, but I think that's more fitting for the genre that he writes in. I adore both of these books. The Farseer trilogy is amongst my favorite fantasy of all time. Norwegian Wood is amongst my favorite literary fiction of all time. And I think if you liked one, that you would likely enjoy the other. To turn the tables to something a little more fun, but not necessarily as lighthearted as everybody thinks, I would like to say that if you enjoyed Discworld by Terry Pratchett, that you might enjoy Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. That might be a good place to take your segue into literary fiction. Now, I will admit that I have not actually read any of the Discworld novels, and maybe that means that I can't comment on what would be appropriate or what would be good to read, but I have spent a lot of time watching videos, especially Alan's videos from the Library of Alexandria, about Discworld and what it's about, and I have read other books by Terry Pratchett, such as Good Omens, his book with Neil Gaiman. I've read and really enjoyed his book Nation. And so I think I have at least a little bit of appreciation for how smart and how witty he is. But based on the things that I have heard people who love Discworld say, I really think that if you are a lover of Discworld and the kind of irreverent humor, the satire, the kind of delving into really deep, really important topics, but still making it seem really fun and lighthearted, then I think that you would like Slaughterhouse-Five. Total disclaimer, Kurt Vonnegut is one of my favorite authors. I love everything of his that I have written. I think that he was so smart, so funny. His books are dark but powerful. And I think they're the kinds of books that you can read over and over and over and still find things to talk about and things to discover. Slaughterhouse-Five is probably his most well-known novel, and it follows Billy Pilgrim, who is a World War II veteran, and it follows him throughout his time in the war, and specifically follows him in one of the major Allied bombings in Germany, which Kurt Vonnegut had also experienced firsthand, and so his writing of those passages came from personal experience, and then follows him in his time after the war. This definitely has some science fiction elements. There's a bit of time travel here, and really, again, like very darkly funny, but it is an exploration of violence, of the things that we as human beings do to each other, what it means to be a human. There's so much to unpack in Vonnegut's work, and his books are so tiny. Slaughterhouse-Five will take not even a day to get through, but so worth it. So if you like the kind of humor and kind of looking for deeper meaning in humorous writing, then I think that you would like both of these books. The next is a book that was hugely popular on Booktube over the last year, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. So I think if you liked this book, if you read this book when it was so hyped up when it came out last year, and you enjoyed it, I think that you might also enjoy the book Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. So Addie LaRue, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to read it, is a Faustian tale about a young French girl named Addie LaRue who sells her soul to the devil in exchange for freedom, is how she words it. And how that gets interpreted by this demon, essentially, is that she will be giving everlasting life, but she will be unable to make a mark on the world. So people will not remember her after they've had a conversation. She can't write down a story or a poem. She can't draw a picture. She can't do anything that will leave a lasting imprint on anyone. I really liked Addie LaRue. I found it fascinating. I like Faustian type novels. I love Dr. Faustus. I love The Picture of Dorian Gray. And I thought it was really interesting to see how V.E. Schwab took this morality tale, essentially, this set of expectations that have been built since the 1500s, and gave us a story that feels so uniquely 21st century. In an age where we record everything that we do, where what we do gets put out into the world to be judged, to be interpreted, to be liked or disliked, it was really fascinating to read a story about a character who could leave no imprint. I feel like that is a very 21st century fear, this idea that when we leave, we won't leave any type of mark behind. And I thought there was a lot to think about in Addie LaRue. I really liked the writing, but I also just liked thinking about how these types of stories have evolved and how they tell us things about the world that we live in. Addie LaRue explores the idea of humanity, about what makes a life as opposed to an existence, what we value, and how we can carry through the things we value after we have gone. And by contrast, Never Let Me Go, while it's a very different story, it follows a young girl named Kathy H., who at the beginning of the story, as it opens up, is working as what she terms a carer. And as she is working with her patients, she thinks back on her adolescence at a boarding school in England called Hailsham. And she thinks about the friendships that she had while she was there and discoveries about herself and about the nature of humanity and about the nature of the world. And it is a very slow, thoughtful, and deliberate novel, and it is beautiful. The writing is stunning, the characterization is excellent, the exploration of theme is unparalleled. This is one of the best books that I have ever read, and again, it does have some science fiction type themes, just as Slaughterhouse-Five did, but I think if you liked that kind of character-focused narrative in Addie LaRue and that exploration of humanity and what makes life meaningful, then you might find a lot that you like in Never Let Me Go as well. The final comparison that I wanted to make, and this one I think is the most tenuous. I'm not entirely confident in this, but I just really love both of these books, so I wanted a chance to put them on the list, and maybe people will agree that there are some similarities here. And that is, if you like The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, then perhaps you would also like Love in the Time of Cholera. So The Night Circus, for anyone who hasn't read it, is a tale, it's almost magical realism. It follows two young magicians and their mentors as they enter into this competition through time, basically, where they are trying to outmaneuver each other in works of magical prowess. And as these two magicians, one is a young woman, one is a young man, as they begin to try to outdo the other, they start to fall in love with the other magician's magic. And then through that magic and that, I guess, externalization of the magic, they begin to fall in love with each other. This is an intensely atmospheric book. You can feel the setting come alive on the page. It is gorgeously written, and I really, really love it. It's one of my favorite fantasy standalones. I know that kind of lyrical prose is not for everyone, but if you haven't read this, then I'd at least encourage you to give it a try. I also think it's a great work of fantasy for people who are not fantasy readers. I got my mother-in-law to read it. I gotten some of my friends who are not big fantasy readers to read it. And everybody that I have given it to has really enjoyed it. Love in the Time of Cholera is a work of magical realism that follows a young girl and a young man who fall in love in their youth and whose parents don't want them to be together, and kind of works to pull them apart. Then what follows is how that early relationship impacts the rest of their lives. The young woman eventually gets married, and the young man who is trying to stay faithful is not quite successful at that, and it follows them through time, like over the length of their lifespan. Probably the least straightforward of the works that I have recommended. It does require a little bit more of a critical lens. At the very surface, you could interpret it as a love story or the idea of this enduring love, but I think if you take the time to deconstruct it a little, that there's a lot to unpack there. I paired the two of them together because I think that Love in the Time of Cholera is also intensely atmospheric. I think the setting really comes alive. The characters are vibrant. The location is vibrant, and the writing is also gorgeous, just as in The Night Circus. They're very different in terms of what the atmosphere is, but I feel like both these authors do a great job of capturing that atmosphere and making you feel like you are a part of the story. So those are 6 of my recommendations for kind of introductions into literary fiction based on popular fantasy reads. If you have any similar recommendations, if you agree or disagree, then feel free to let me know. I hope that at least for someone who watches this video, it might point you in the direction of a book that you may not have otherwise read. And I will see you again with another video soon. Bye.